I never believed in ghosts or spiritual stories. I am a mechanical engineer who has spent 15 years working on offshore oil rigs. I believe in steel structures, hydraulic pressure, and paychecks clearing on time. That is exactly why I took this job. Temporary management of the Blackwood Island Lighthouse for 3 winter months. The salary was an insane figure. $5,000 a week, direct deposit every Friday, plus a contract completion bonus. No internet, no phone signal, only a shortwave radio to contact the mainland in case of emergency. It was November 14th. The sky was gray, and the wind shrieked cold gusts through my thick coat. The small fishing boat taking me to the island was steered by an old man named Holloway, whose skin was wrinkled like a worn-out old map. During the 15-mile journey from the port to the open sea, he didn't say a word. Only the loud diesel engine noise and the sound of waves crashing hard against the boat's side. When the island emerged from the fog, I felt a cold chill run down my spine, and it wasn't due to the weather. Blackwood Island was actually just a jet-black granite rock, jaggedly protruding from the cold waters of the Atlantic Ocean. No trees, no beaches, just slippery moss, and at the highest point, the lighthouse. It was built in 1924, a rusty iron tower, 120 feet high, about 36 meters, painted jet black instead of the red and white stripes usually seen on lighthouses. It looked more like a giant abandoned factory chimney than a guiding light. "You have 3 minutes to move your gear," Holloway said, his voice hoarse. That was the first sentence he said to me. "I won't turn off the engine." "Aren't you going to give me a hand?" I asked, throwing the heavy duffel bag onto the cracked concrete pier. He spat into the sea, eyes not looking at me, but staring at that pitch-black tower. "I don't step on that rock. Never." I sighed, shouldering my backpack and lifting the food crate. When I turned back to say goodbye, Holloway had already turned the boat around. He accelerated away so fast that water splashed all over my shoes, as if he were fleeing from a fire. I stood there alone. Silence fell immediately as the engine sound faded. Only the sound of wind whistling through rock crevices, creating a sound like a broken flute. I opened the main door with the heavy brass key sent via mail. The door groaned with a piercing metallic sound, revealing the thick darkness inside. The smell of old machine oil, sea salt, and something acrid like rusting copper hit my nose. The cast iron spiral staircase ran upwards, disappearing into the darkness. I counted exactly 144 steps while climbing to the living quarters, located just below the lantern room. The round, cold room with a single iron bed, an old stove, and a dusty desk. But what made me freeze was when I climbed the final steps to the lantern room, home to the giant Fresnel lens. According to my mechanical knowledge, a lighthouse lens is designed to amplify light from a small bulb into a powerful beam projecting dozens of miles out to sea. The prisms must face outward. When I stood there, looking at the complex glass machine taller than a man, I realized something horribly irrational. The curved sides of the lens were facing inward. The entire structure of this light was not designed to illuminate the ocean. It was designed to focus all the light into the central axis of the tower, and straight down the spiral staircase I had just ascended. I checked my watch. 4:47 p.m. The sun was setting, and according to the contract, I had to turn on the light in exactly 13 minutes. As an engineer, the first thing I thought of was a construction error, but installing a 2-ton Fresnel lens system backwards is not something you can mistake, like putting shoes on the wrong feet. Every screw, every brass support frame was securely fixed, as if it was destined to lie in this grotesque position. I shook my head, trying to push away the discomfort rising in my throat. Anyway, my job is just to operate, maintain the generator, and ensure that giant light bulb doesn't go out. I walked over to the main control panel, a cold gray metal block with old-fashioned pressure gauges from the 52nds. Right on the white porcelain starter lever, someone had taped a yellowed piece of paper with electrical tape. The handwriting was shaky, black ink pressed deep into the paper, as if the writer had pushed the pen very hard. Operating instructions. Read immediately. Start the generator at 17. Turn off at 6. Must not deviate by more than 5 minutes. Lock the hatch separating the lantern room and the living quarters immediately after turning on the light. Important. Never look directly at the lens while it is rotating. If you see the light change color, do not check the bulb. Check the door at the base of the tower. Remember, the light here is not for ships. It is for what is inside. I read the last line over and over. For what is inside? Ridiculous joke, I muttered, tearing the paper down and crumpling it in my hand. Perhaps the old manager went mad from the loneliness in this godforsaken place. Cabin fever is real, and it makes people imagine all sorts of things. The clock struck 17. I took a deep breath, the smell of grease and salty moisture filling my lungs, then pulled the lever. Clack. A dry metallic crash rang out, followed by the low ooh, and sound of the gear system starting to move. The floor beneath my feet shook violently. The giant machine began to rotate, and then the light flared up. Normally, you would see a beam of light sweeping across the horizon, cutting through the night, but not here. When the 1000 W halogen bulb blazed to life, the inverted curved prisms of the Fresnel lens gathered all that light, compressing it into a thick, blinding pillar of light and shooting it straight down onto the glass floor beneath my feet. It pierced through the thick glass, shining straight down the pitch-black spiral staircase below. I squinted, unconsciously following that beam of light. It was like a drill made of light boring deep into the guts of the tower. The visual effect was bizarre. The pitch-black iron stairs suddenly glowed. The shadows of the steps cast on the wall did not stand still, but rotated, creating the sensation that the entire tower was twisting. A wave of nausea and dizziness hit immediately. My stomach tightened. I felt as if gravity had just been inverted, as if I were being sucked into that pit of light. Remembering rule number 3, I hurriedly turned my face away, panting. Cold sweat broke out on my forehead, even though the room temperature was only about 10 degrees Celsius. I backed away, hands trembling as I slammed the iron hatch door shut, separating the lantern room from the stairs below, then spun the valve to lock it tight. The clank of the door latch rang out, but it didn't make me feel any safer, because even through the thick steel floor, I could still feel the rhythmic vibration under my feet. Not the vibration of machinery. It was more like a heartbeat, and it was beating very hard from the very bottom of the tower. The first night passed in auditory torture. Just imagine, lying right underneath a spinning machine weighing tons that is crushing the silence. The whirring. Sound of metal gears echoing through the ceiling, sounding like someone slowly sharpening a knife right above my head. But the worst thing wasn't the sound. It was the light. Although I had closed the living quarters door, the light from that inverted lamp still found a way in. Every 15 seconds, a blinding streak of light swept through the crack under the door, cutting across the pitch-black room and then vanishing, leaving purple afterimages dancing on the retina. I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., my throat was parched. I needed water. The reserve water tank was located on the staircase landing, just outside the living quarters door. I shuffled out of bed, turned the doorknob, and stepped out onto the iron corridor. The scene before me paralyzed me. The entire interior of the lighthouse was performing a crazy dance of light. The concentrated beam of light from above spiraled straight down into the abyssal depth of the staircase, sweeping around the curved brick walls. I stood holding the railing, looking down. Light swept past. Bright, dark, bright, dark. That was when I noticed the discrepancy. As an engineer, I understand the laws of light and shadow. If there is an object blocking light, a shadow will be cast on the wall. If there is no object, there will be no shadow. It is basic physics. When the light beam swept across the stair section about 20 feet below where I stood, around the 100th step, I saw the black shadow of the handrail clearly cast on the opposite brick wall. But beside those vertical iron bars, there was another shadow. It had the shape of a round lump, the size of a human head, protruding from the step. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was hallucinating from lack of sleep. I stared at that exact step when the light returned. The step was completely empty. There was nothing there, just a flat, rusty iron plate. But the moment the light hit the wall behind that step, the shadow appeared again. This time, that lump seemed to have elongated a bit. It no longer looked like a rock or a pile of rope. It looked like a person sitting with knees pulled up, head bowed down. My stomach knotted. I gripped the railing so hard my knuckles turned white. I waited for the next rotation of the light. Whoosh. The light swept past. The step was still empty, but on the wall, and that shadow had lifted its head. It had no eyes or nose, just a solid black projection on the gray brick background, but I swore I could feel it looking back up, looking straight at me. A chill ran from my heels to the top of my head, numbing my scalp. I backed away, bumped into the room door, and knocked over the water bucket next to it. The clang rang out ear-splittingly, echoing down to the bottom of the tower like thunder. And in the moment of silence after that crash, before the loud machinery noise drowned everything out again, I heard another sound echoing up from below. Not metal, not wind, it was a giggling sound. Dry, short, sounding like two stones grinding against each other. I rushed into the room, locked the door tight, and pushed the desk across the exit. I slumped onto the bed, heart pounding against my chest. My trembling hands grabbed the crumpled rule paper from the afternoon, smoothing it out on my lap. Rule number 5. The light here is not for ships. It is for what is inside. I was wrong. This is not a lighthouse to guide the way. This is a cage. And I just realized I am locked in with something. The next 3 days passed, in a fog of exhaustion and paranoia. I tried to keep myself awake with strong black coffee and cigarettes, but sleep kept flickering like a teaser. During the day, when the light was off, the lighthouse returned to being a lifeless pile of scrap metal. I took a flashlight and went down to check that 100th step. There was nothing at all. Just bumpy rust stains and peeling paint. I even tapped it hard with a wrench. The sound rang out sharp and solid. No hollow spots, no hidden spaces. But when night fell, and that freakish machine started spinning, all laws of physics seemed to be bent. On the 4th night, things escalated. It was about 11 p.m. I was sitting at the desk, trying to write a technical report to keep my mind busy. Suddenly, I heard it. Screech, screech. The sound came from the iron wall right next to my bed. It sounded like someone was using a long nail, slashing hard on the metal surface from the other side. I stiffened, the pen falling from my hand and rolling on the floor. On the other side of that wall was the void of the spiral staircase, where the light beam was shining down. Screech, screech, screech. The scratching became more frantic, faster. It was no longer a random sound. It had a rhythm, and more horribly, it was moving. It started low, at floor level, then slowly moved upwards along the curved wall, heading towards the ceiling, leading up to the lantern room. I held my breath, pressing my ear against the wall. The cold metal layer conducted sound very well. Intermingled with the metal tearing sound was another sound, wet and slimy, like the sound of a giant octopus slithering on a soaked ship deck. Sloosh, sloosh. Who's there? I shouted, my voice breaking with fear. Holloway? Is that you? The scratching stopped immediately. The silence lasted about 10 seconds, so heavy I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. Then, right next to my ear, through the steel sheet less than 5 millimeters thick, a whisper rang out. It spoke neither English nor any language I had ever known. It sounded like wind whistling through rock crevices, but twisted into meaningful syllables. Ska. Ra. I jerked back violently, falling onto the floor. At the same time, the entire tower shook violently, not from the generator. A massive impact from inside the tower, as if something huge just lashed out hard against the wall. The room lights flickered continuously. The strong stench of rusty copper and rotting flesh rushed into the room through the gap under the door. I knew I couldn't stay in this room any longer. I needed a weapon. I needed answers. I rushed to ransack the old storage cabinet in the corner, hoping to find a crowbar or anything for self-defense. In my panic, I pulled the bottom drawer out too hard. It slipped off the rails and fell to the floor. Beneath the gaping cabinet cavity, a loose wooden floorboard was revealed. And beneath that, peeking out, was a black leather notebook, covered in green mold and warped by moisture. I tremblingly picked it up. The first page bore the owner's name, Thomas J., Lighthouse Keeper 1988. I flipped quickly through the pages stuck together. The initial lines were very neat, recording weather and oil levels. But later on, the handwriting became increasingly scribbled and insane. And the last page, written in red pen, or something like dried blood, had only a single line written over and over, filling the entire page. It grows from the light. Don't turn off the light. If the light is off, it won't be held in the stairs anymore. It will get out. I devoured the diary under the yellow light of the desk lamp, hands turning each moldy page like a madman thirsting for water. What Thomas recorded were not lines of delirium, but a detailed cold report on his own slow death. Day 42. I understand its principle. This inverted Fresnel lens creates a powerful photon light cage. It's like a high-voltage electric fence, but for things that belong to the darkness. That monster. It lives in the crack at the foundation of the tower. Light keeps it there, burning it if it tries to rise. Day 56. But there is a side effect. The light also shapes it. The longer it shines, the more solid it becomes. It is learning to endure the pain. It is climbing higher every night. Floor 10. Floor 20. Floor 50. I slammed the notebook shut, feeling a cold draft run down my spine. I looked out the window. Outside, the sky was pitch black like ink, the boundary between sea and sky no longer visible. Gusts of wind shrieked, hitting the window pane with thud. Thud. Sounds like fists. A winter storm was approaching. The radio on the desk suddenly crackled, cutting through the silence. The ear-splitting static hiss. Then a mechanical voice rang out, announcing a Force 12 storm. But right in the middle of the weather report, the announcer's voice distorted, dropped in pitch, and stretched out grotesquely. Wind gusts. Level. Level. Help, P. Me. I grabbed the radio, intending to turn it off, but my finger froze. Intermingled in the static of the radio waves was another sound. Breathing. Wet and heavy, coming right from the tiny speaker. Open. The door. I yanked the cord, throwing the radio into the corner of the room. It went silent. But the silence that followed was even more terrifying. Suddenly, the ceiling bulb flickered. Once. Twice. My heart skipped a beat. The light from the gap under the door. That ghostly purple light casting up from the tower shaft. It also weakened for a split second, then flared up again. The generator. I rushed to the main control panel. The fuel gauge needle was pointing at the red alarm level, oscillating wildly. But that was impossible. I had just filled the 500-liter tank yesterday morning. It couldn't be drained completely in just 30 hours. Unless something had sabotaged the pipeline. Or something down below was drinking energy faster than normal. Boom. A horrific crash rang out from the bottom floor, where the generator was located. The whole tower shook, as if hit by a ship. Then, the light went out. Darkness descended fast and thick like tar. The steady sound of machinery went silent. Only the sound of the wind screaming outside remained, and the rain started lashing against the glass. In that total darkness, I heard the familiar screech. Screech. But this time, it was no longer coming from inside the wall. The sound of metal being torn apart rang out right beneath my feet. The iron hatch door that I had locked tight, the only obstacle separating me from the spiral staircase, was shaking violently. Something was punching the door from below, and there was no more light to hold it back. Darkness engulfed me like a blood-soaked wet blanket. No light, no direction, only the boom, boom, sound from the floor shaking violently below. I heard the metal groaning. The steel latch of the hatch door was bending. Someone, or something, down there had unimaginable strength. It didn't just want to open the door. It wanted to tear the passage apart. "Get away from me!" I screamed hopelessly, backing away until my back hit the cold control panel. My hands fumbled in the darkness, searching for anything. A box cutter, a wrench, anything that could be used as a weapon. Suddenly, an ear-splitting ZZZ, ZZZ, ZZZ rang out, like high-voltage electricity arcing through damp air. Emergency backup system. I should have felt relieved. But no. When the backup bulbs flickered and turned on, I realized this light was completely wrong. It wasn't warm yellow or cold white. It was purple. A pale, sickly purple, like the color of bruises on a long-dead corpse. Ultraviolet UV light flooded the room, distorting everything. Under this light, my skin looked ashen, blue veins standing out clearly like worms crawling under the skin. Dust, suspended in the air, glowed like ghostly phosphorescent specks. And the banging on the door stopped abruptly. The silence returned, heavier and more stifling than before. Only the headache-inducing buzz of the UV lights and the wind whistling outside remained. I held my breath, eyes glued to the hatch in the middle of the floor. The brass latch was bent at a 45-degree angle, about to snap in two. But the most horrible thing was what was oozing from the door crack. Under the purple light, I saw a thick black liquid bubbling, oozing through the rubber gasket of the hatch. It dripped onto the floor, hissing and smoking when it touched the metal. A pungent stench rose up, the smell of rotting seaweed mixed with burning flesh. I was hypnotized by the scene, feet planted firmly on the floor. Then, from that pool of pitch-black liquid, a sound rang out. Not a scream, but a voice. Clear, distinct, and so familiar, it made my blood run cold. "Engineer, why did you turn off the light?" It was Holloway's voice, the boatman who brought me here. But Holloway had left 5 days ago. Are you down there?" I asked tremblingly, stupidly hoping the old man had returned to save me. "It's so cold," the voice continued, but this time it changed, distorting gradually, shifting from Holloway's gravelly voice to a higher, clearer tone. "It's so dark down here, Thomas." I covered my mouth to stop a scream. Thomas. That was the name of the old lighthouse keeper, the owner of the diary. It is mimicking the voices of the people it has met. Then, the voice changed again. This time, it was deep, resonant, and exactly like my voice. "Open the door." I forgot the key. It spoke with my own voice, with the grumpy intonation I use when annoyed. I backed away, crashing into the glass cabinet holding fire equipment. A red fire axe lay behind the fragile glass. I smashed the glass with my elbow, ignoring the shards embedding in my flesh. I grabbed the axe, the heavy feel of the wooden handle bringing a fragile sense of confidence. "Get lost!" I roared, raising the axe high. Immediately, the black shadow under the door crack withdrew. A giggling sound rang out, echoing from the other side of the steel. "Fine, if you won't open." The sound of metal tearing rang out, screech. I saw the tip of something sharp, like a pitch-black claw, a handspan long, piercing through the 2 centimeters thick steel of the hatch, right next to the latch. It began to carve a circle, slowly and smoothly like a hot knife cutting through butter. The sound of metal hitting the floor, CLang, ear-splittingly loud. The cut-out round steel piece rolled on the floor, revealing a pitch-black hole leading down to hell below. I backed away behind the giant lens, hands gripping the axe handle until they ached. My breathing was rapid, forming thin white wisps of smoke in the cold air. From that black hole, a hand reached up and grabbed the edge of the floor. No, calling that a hand is an insult to anatomy. It was a mess of elongated, pitch-black fingers with swollen joints and curved claws digging deep into the steel floor. Its flesh looked like melting asphalt, dripping onto the floor. Then, the head. When it slowly rose under the pale UV purple light, I almost vomited. It had no fixed face. That shiny black surface was boiling. For a second, I saw an eye bulge out, staring at me. Then it sank back into the black flesh, replaced by a mouth full of sharp teeth. It climbed onto the floor with jerky, broken movements like a tangled puppet. Crack, crack. The sound of twisting bones rang out with its every move. When it stood up straight, it nearly touched the ceiling. Its shadow cast long over the entire room, swallowing the little faint light remaining. Mas. It moaned, but not calling the old name. It was tasting that name. I shouted once to regain my spirit, pouring all my strength and fear into the axe swing. The sharp axe blade tore the wind, striking straight into the monster's shoulder. Thwack. The sensation transmitted to my hand was not hitting flesh and bone, but chopping into a sack of thick mud. The axe blade sank deep into that pitch-black body, but no blood flowed out. Only a pitch-black liquid splattered onto my shirt, burning like acid. The monster showed no pain. It slowly turned its faceless head towards me. The axe remained lodged in its shoulder, but its flesh was swallowing the metal, black tendrils wrapping tightly around the axe handle. It raised its long arm. I let go of the axe, backed away, tripped over a pile of wires, and fell backward, back slamming hard into the base of the Fresnel lens. "Light. Hurts," it whispered, the voice echoing in my head rather than through my ears. Under the purple light, I saw its outer shell smoking and sizzling. UV light was hurting it, but not enough to kill it. It was trying to adapt, the black skin hardening into horny scales to withstand the radiation. It took a step forward. The floor shook. I had no way out. Behind me was the glass wall of the lighthouse. Outside was the screaming storm and a 100-foot drop to the reef. In front was the immortal monster. There was only one place left. I turned, grabbed the iron frame of the giant Fresnel lens, and began to climb to its top. This glass machine, over 2 meters tall, was the highest point in the room. The monster lunged. Its claws swept through the air, just centimeters from my boot heel. A sliced sound rang out, my rubber boot heel sliced cleanly off. I climbed to the top of the lens, sitting precariously on the brass cap. Looking down from above, I saw it standing at the base, looking up, and then it started climbing up after me. But right at that moment, my hand touched a cold object attached to the top of the lens. A small emergency hammer used for breaking escape glass, and beside it, a line of text engraved into the brass that I had never noticed before. In case of emergency, break the central prism. Release the light. The monster's slimy hand had grabbed my left ankle. A bone-chilling cold transmitted through the thick denim, as if I were being clamped by living ice. It yanked hard. I slid, my chest slamming into the brass frame of the lens. Stay with us. It hissed, its mouth full of jagged teeth, gaping open right beneath my feet, waiting to swallow. I had no time left to consider consequences or physics. I gripped the escape hammer tight, let out a desperate scream, and struck hard right at the center of the central prism, the god's eye converging the inverted light. Crash! That sound was not like normal breaking glass. It was like a grenade exploding right next to the ear. Thick shards of glass, sharp as razors, sprayed out in all directions. But more terrible was what escaped from that crack. A beam of blinding white energy exploded. If before, the lens cage compressed light inward to imprison the monster, now, that balance was broken. Light from the high-power bulb, no longer bent in order, released chaotically and violently. The monster screamed. It was the most terrible sound I had ever heard in my life. It sounded like thousands of pigs being slaughtered at once, mixed with the sound of crushing metal. I saw its pitch-black body catching fire. Not fire, but disintegration. Under the harsh and pure white light, its shadow shell peeled off in chunks, dissolving into gray smoke. It let go of my leg, writhed backward, and fell onto the steel floor. But I wasn't much better off. The light explosion knocked me off the top of the lens. I flew backward, my back slamming hard into the tempered glass surrounding the lantern room. Crack. The storm shield glass, already under pressure from the force 12 winds outside, couldn't withstand my impact. It shattered open. The storm rushed in instantly. Freezing air, salty rain, and the ocean's roar flooded the room like a deluge. Shards of broken glass were swept up by the wind like invisible knives. I lay flat on the floor, hands covering my face. My eyes burned as if acid had been poured in. I could see nothing but a blinding white washout. My ears were ringing, hearing only the whistling wind and the fading scream of that creature. The lighthouse shook violently. I felt it tilting. The century-old structure was buckling under the storm's power and the destruction from within. I had to get out of here. Immediately. I tried to open my eyes, but tears kept streaming down from the pain. Through the blurry water, I saw the hole in the floor, where the monster had emerged, now emitting billowing white smoke. The monster had vanished, or dissolved, or fled back into the abyss. I crawled on all fours towards the exit, hands groping on the floor filled with broken glass shards. Blood flowed profusely from my palms and knees, mixing with the puddles of rain. I touched the iron door handle leading to the outside balcony. It was freezing cold. I pushed hard. The door swung open, and the storm immediately slapped me straight in the face, almost blowing me off into the abyss. But better to die falling into the sea than stay in this cursed tower. I stepped to the railing, clinging to the slippery iron bar, and that was when I looked down. In the flashy lightning of the storm, I saw the pitch-black sea below boiling. Hundreds, no, thousands of pitch-black heads were rising from the water, surrounding the base of the lighthouse. They were looking up, looking at me, and they were starting to climb the cliff. I had no other choice. Staying on the balcony meant being torn apart by thousands of things climbing up from the sea. They moved unbelievably fast. The sound of claws scratching against granite, and the iron shell of the tower sounded like hail. I backed into the lantern room, slammed the door, and bolted it, knowing it would only hold for a few minutes. Inside, the air was sweltering like a furnace. The broken lens was spinning madly, shooting out deadly beams of light sweeping back and forth across the room. Every time a beam swept over my flesh, I felt like a cigarette butt was pressed against me. My facial skin started to blister. The only way out was down, crawling into the very lair the monster had just crawled out of. I inhaled a breath full of ozone and acrid smoke, then jumped down the hole in the iron floor. I landed with a thud on the first landing of the spiral staircase. The floor was slippery with the pitch-black liquid left by the monster. I slipped, slammed my hip against the railing, almost tumbling down into the abyssal depth of the tower. The scene below made me want to stop breathing. Along the 120-foot height of the tower were small circular windows arranged at different elevations, and at every window, I saw pale, sodden faces pressed tight against the glass. They were looking in. Hundreds of pitch-black eyes, no whites, watching me. Crack! The window around the 8th floor, 20 feet below me, shattered. A black hand reached in, grabbed the window frame, then pulled a wet body into the tower. Then a second. A third. They were invading the staircase. Damn it! Damn it! I screamed, starting to run. I didn't run down step by step. I jumped. 3 steps, 4 steps at a time. My boots pounding on the iron stairs echoed boom, 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 mixed with the thunder outside. Behind me, from the lantern room above, I heard the balcony door being smashed. They got in above. Below me, the monsters climbing through windows were starting to climb up to intercept. I was trapped in the middle, around the 90th step. I looked around desperately. Right next to me was the door to the old reserve oil storage room, a tiny room halfway up the tower that I had never opened because the lock was completely rusted. The monsters below were only 2 spirals away from me. I could hear the wet sound of their bare feet stepping on metal. The stench of the sea was so strong, I wanted to vomit. I drew the flare gun I had worn on my hip since the storm started. The only weapon I had. I didn't aim at the monsters. I aimed at the rusted lock of the oil storage door. Boom! The bright red flare round exploded right at the lock. The heat of the burning magnesium melted the rotten metal. The door burst open. I threw myself inside, falling face down onto the dusty wooden floor. Immediately, I kicked the door shut with my foot and dragged a metal shelf full of empty oil cans across the door. Outside, the sound of running footsteps rushed past the door. Screeching, claws scratching against iron rang out right next to my ear. I lay still in the darkness, panting, clutching the empty flare gun. This room had no windows. I was safe temporarily, but then I heard another sound. Right inside this room. Drip. Drip. The sound of water dripping. I flipped open my Zippo lighter. The tiny flame flared up, illuminating the cramped room. In the corner, huddled in the dark, was a gaunt, haggard figure with white hair and beard reaching the ground. He was holding a box cutter, eyes wide and staring at me. That was not a monster. That was a human. He bared his nearly toothless gums in a smile, whispering in a hoarse voice, long unused. "Welcome, new guy. I've been waiting here since 1988. That was Thomas, the lighthouse keeper presumed dead. He looked like a living human. His skin was ashen, clinging tight to the skull like a layer of wet paper, eyes cloudy and nearly blind from being in the darkness too long. Are you still alive?" I stammered, hand still clutching the lighter, the only light source between us. Thomas recoiled from the tiny flame. He hissed, "Turn it off! Turn it off now!" They see heat. They see warmth. Outside the wooden door blocked by the iron shelf, the scratching became more frantic. Moans of you. You rang out like a crowd of drowning people, gasping for air. The door began to crack. Thomas lunged, not to help me block the door, but to snatch the lighter. "What have you done?" he screamed, the stench from his mouth blowing into my face. "You broke the lens. You rang the dinner bell for them." I pushed him away. Thomas stumbled into the corner, weak as a straw doll. "I had no other choice," I shouted back. "That monster. It was going to kill me." Thomas chuckled, a wet, terrifying sound. "Ha ha. That wasn't a monster. That was the jailer." The inverted light kept the jailer awake to watch over this island. Now you've released it. And the ones outside, the sea worms, they fear nothing anymore. Bam! A pitch-black hand punched through the rotten wooden door, groping in the air just inches from my face. Its claws were sharp as knives, cutting the air. I backed away, bumping into an old oil pipe running along the wall. It was hollow, leading straight underground. A crazy idea popped into my head. "This pipe!" I pointed to the circular hatch in the floor where the pipe passed through. "Where does it go?" Thomas looked up, his soulless eyes flashing with horror. "Don't. That's the waste discharge line. It leads straight to the sea cave at the foundation, where they hatch their eggs. Going down there is feeding yourself to them. Better than dying here, I shouted, then used all my strength to turn the rusted hatch valve. It was jammed. I kicked the handle hard. Once, twice. Screech. The hatch rotated slightly. The wooden door behind me shattered. Dozens of slimy black creatures poured into the room like a cascade of black mud. The fishy stench rose sharply. In the flickering light of the Zippo fallen on the floor, I saw their mouths full of needle teeth gaping open. They didn't rush at me first. They rushed at Thomas. The old man screamed, a gut-wrenching scream as claws sank into his gaunt body. He didn't resist, just spread his arms as if accepting fate, muttering, "Turn off the light. Turn off the light." Seizing that moment, I kicked the hatch wheel one last time. It popped open. A blast of freezing wind and the roar of waves from the abyssal depth below slapped my face. It was a pitch-black, steep slide pipe leading straight down to a watery hell. A monster turned its head, saw me. It hissed and lunged. I didn't think anymore. I closed my eyes, took a breath full of Thomas's blood smell, and jumped into the darkness. My body slid at breakneck speed inside the slippery, moss-covered metal pipe. The screams of the monsters faded above, replaced by the roar of the ocean waiting below. The sensation of sliding in that pipe was like being swallowed by the gut of a giant snake. Absolute darkness. The smell of mold and seawater rushed into my nose, mixed with the pungent stench of something rotting. Splash! I fell freely into a freezing cold body of water. The cold was so terrible it knocked all the air out of my lungs in an instant. This was not normal seawater. It was thick, slimy, and had the bitter, salty taste of precipitated salt. I kicked wildly to surface, my lungs screaming for oxygen. When my head broke the surface, I realized I was in a giant sea cave located right beneath the Lighthouse foundation. The roar of ocean waves echoed from the distant cave mouth, where storm lightning occasionally flashed, illuminating the living hell I had just fallen into. The water around me was not empty at all. It was bobbing with thousands of milky white spheres, the size of grapefruits, floating sluggishly. I was swimming in a sea of eggs. Thomas was right. This is where they hatch. And my fall had disturbed the whole nest. Pop. Pop. The eggs around me started to burst. Tiny, pitch-black creatures, like tadpoles but with sharp teeth, shot out of the slimy shells. They swarmed my clothes, tearing at the thick fabric. "Ah!" I screamed as I felt dozens of sharp needles piercing the flesh of my legs and stomach. I brushed them off, paddling with all my might towards the cave mouth, where the lightning was beckoning. But from the deep bottom of the cave, a massive black mass was rising. This time, it wasn't the humanoid monsters. It was the mother, a giant eye, the size of a car, emitting a faint purple phosphorescent light, slowly opening beneath my feet. That purple light shone through the water, illuminating my legs, kicking the water in desperation. A giant tentacle reached up, wrapping tightly around my left ankle. The pull was so strong I felt my hip joint about to dislocate. I was dragged down. Water flooded my mouth and nose. I choked, vision blurring. In the moment near death, survival instincts surged stronger than ever. I pulled the tiny folding knife from my pocket, the one I always carried to cut cables, and flicked the blade open. I curled up underwater, stabbing repeatedly at the slimy tentacle wrapping my leg. Black blood spurted out, mixing with seawater, obscuring vision. The monster convulsed, loosening its grip for a second. Just that 1 second. I kicked hard against the hideous tentacle to gain momentum, launching myself up to the surface. I dashed towards the cave mouth, where 5-meter-high white-capped waves were crashing in. The storm, which I once feared, was now my only salvation. A giant wave hit, sweeping me up like a rag doll, lifting me up and throwing me hard out of the stone cave. I slammed into sharp rocks, feeling my ribs crack, but I didn't care. I was out in the open sea. The swirling current swept me away from the island, away from the collapsing pitch-black tower and that horrific cave. I drifted in the raging ocean, clinging tight to a piece of driftwood, likely a part of the pier destroyed by the storm. Rain whipped my face, washing away the black slime. I turned my head for a last look. Under lightning tearing the sky, Blackwood Island Lighthouse no longer emitted a guiding light. Instead, the whole tower was shaking, and from the shattered top, A giant column of black smoke was rising, merging with the dark clouds. No, that was not smoke. It was thousands of released monsters, flying up into the night sky like a broken hive of bees. Then darkness swallowed me. I passed out amidst the freezing waves. I woke up to the steady beep of a heart rate monitor, but the first thing I felt was pain. A brain-piercing pain, as if someone were pouring acid directly into my eye sockets. "Turn off the light! Please turn off the light!" I screamed, hands clawing frantically at the bandages wrapped tight around my eyes. Nurses rushed in, injecting me with sedatives. Their voices sounded distant, blurred. They found me drifting 40 miles south of Blackwood Island, clinging to a rotting plank of wood. I had been in a coma for 3 days due to hypothermia and severe dehydration. According to the official report, the Blackwood Island Lighthouse collapsed completely during that historic storm. The cause was determined to be foundation erosion and a gas explosion from the old generator. No one found Holloway's body or any trace of Thomas. They were just names on the missing at sea list. No one believed my story. They said I was hallucinating due to traumatic brain injury and CO poisoning. 6 months have passed since that night. I am writing these lines in a cheap rented basement apartment in Seattle. I used 3 layers of black tape to seal every crack in the windows. I smashed all the light bulbs in the house. The computer screen I'm using is set to the lowest brightness, and I have to wear 2 layers of sunglasses to look at it without crying blood. My eyes have changed forever. Doctors call it severe photophobia. They say my retinas were damaged by looking directly at high-intensity UV rays for too long. But they are wrong. My eyes are not broken. They have evolved. In absolute darkness, I see as clearly as day. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is what I see when there is light. Last night, I risked looking through a tiny crack in the window curtain. Outside was a deserted street under the yellowish streetlights, and I saw them. They were no longer in the giant monster forms like on the island. They were smaller, more hidden. They clung to streetlights, coiling around the high-pressure bulbs. They slithered on the roofs of parked cars. They were pitch black, slimy shadows, moving right in the blind spots of people's vision. That black cloud I saw rising from the lighthouse that night. They made it to shore. They have integrated into our world. They eat light. They live off this city's energy. And they are breeding. Sometimes I hear that familiar screech. Screech, ringing from the water pipes in the bathroom. Sometimes I see my own shadow on the wall move by itself, even though I'm sitting still. I know they know I'm here. I am the one who broke the cage. I am the one who brought the jailer's scent to the mainland. So, this is my final warning. If one day you are walking under a streetlight and see your shadow suddenly elongate unnaturally, or hear a faint metal scratching sound coming from the lamppost, don't look up. And don't run towards the light, because the light is no longer a safe place.